having a, there we go. So welcome everyone. We have a fun November EJCGC meeting planned, centered solely around electric vehicle policy, what's happening in Sacramento, a lot of fun information. We're a little low on EJCGC members today. And so what we may do is just invite the audience to be panelists so that you guys can join the discussion as well. No pressure to do video on or anything like that. We know you guys didn't come camera ready, even though the folks that I can see that are in attendance are beautiful folks nonetheless. So let's give it a few minutes, let people trickle in, and we will start the meeting. In the meantime, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Your name, organization you're affiliated with, or community you associate with. However you want to label yourself, Naila Pope Harden, Harry Potter fan, however, whatever communities it is that you feel like identifying with today, let us know. All right. We got a few folks. Megan, I see your hand. Oh, perfect. Moise, you're just bringing people.
The chat seems to be disabled, so I just thought I'd point that out.
Oh, thanks for letting us know. Okay. Moise, why don't you just go ahead and bring everybody in?
Okay, yeah, the chat is also now enabled for everyone to communicate with everyone.
Okay, maybe we're getting a few folks more. So, all right. Welcome everyone to November. I keep wanting to call this the October EJCGC meeting. So I'm gonna get us started just because we do have two presentations that are pretty bulky, have a lot of information that we want to get from you guys. And so we're gonna have to kind of balance that. So we're gonna get started. Feel free though to introduce yourself in the chat. The chat function should be working now. Name, community or organization you're affiliated with. Again, this doesn't have to be geography. This can be any type of community that you are a part of. And yeah, we will hop in. Nicole, can you go ahead and start our, perfect. All right, so Climate Plan has been working with Grid Alternatives and Access California to do an analysis on equitable zero emission vehicle deployment policy. Next slide. We're going to run through the presentation. This first slide is basically California's targets around zero emission vehicles and how they've evolved and changed over time and some of the main policies regulating it. The first set of slides are not really for you to have to read and take substance from. I just want you to pay attention to the volume of targets, policies, rules, and regulations that are governing all things electric vehicles. Next slide, please. So one of the things we've done is we've done a pretty extensive lit review on best practices around electric vehicle policy. And through that, we have 7 overarching themes in equity literature. So making sure that targets and incentives go to communities, low-income communities and communities of color, address structural barriers in incentive programs. This can be around applications. I'm supposed to speed through, sorry. Improve meaningful community engagement, reduce pollution, invest in clean air and clean mobility options, minimize the costs associated with electrifying the transportation sector, and just streamlining the decision-making process. Next slide. Nicole.
Yeah, so I'm also gonna walk through this very quickly. As Naila said, we're really not, you don't have to pay attention to all the policies there. We really just want to show like there's a lot of policies. And essentially all these policies govern is the state's existing efforts for zero emission vehicle deployment equitably. So these incentives like target low-income communities and communities of color, and they're also like the vehicle standards improve air quality and reduce costs of electric vehicles. For these policies, they also target incentives and invest in active transportation infrastructure. And then these policies are also just like targeting incentives and trying to minimize new costs. So in terms of like electricity being a new cost in term with like electric vehicles, making sure that that's like equitably thought out. And then these policies, there aren't a lot of policies in terms of like workforce development, and also like policies that standardize like consumer outreach and community outreach, but these are the policies that mainly govern that. And then in terms of regional policy, we just want to highlight that.
Hold on, Nicole, I'm gonna pause you there. So we have a web of state policies, as you guys saw. I think it's about around 50 policies that are all governing electric vehicle implementation, deployment, policy in some way that folks are having to navigate. And on top of that statewide policy, there's also every region also has its own targets and policy. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, so every region, we chose 6 regions to kind of highlight in the report that we're doing. And this, it just is to show like there's a lot of policy that we have to navigate, and there's just different policies we have to navigate across different levels. And then Naila will go more into like what the barriers are still, even though there are all these existing equitable policies.
So we interviewed practitioners of folks who are helping, so organizations that are working to make sure that people in disadvantaged communities have access to cars, and policy and charging stations, and all of the good organizations on the ground that are doing work to ensure that EV deployment is as equitable as possible. Next slide. So some of the main concerns that came out is just the need for more funding. This is more funding for organizations to do outreach, but also more funding for people to be able to access the programs, have incentives, get down payment assistance for vehicles. The structure of the rebates was an issue, requiring a bunch of paperwork and a bunch of reporting. In some cases, and in some regions, they would give folks would get the incentives, the dollar amount, and then they'd have to report that on their taxes, or that would jeopardize their ability to participate in government assistance programs. And so people were less interested in applying if it would jeopardize their ability to get food stamps or housing assistance. The lack of like including alternative modes. So a lot of these programs are vehicle heavy and don't include e-bikes. Then there's other issues around just utilities and not trusting their current utilities. This is a statewide study that we've been doing. So some of this stuff, some of the folks we talked to are in Sacramento. The presentation that we have after this is actually going to be getting at some of the fixes to ensure that Sacramento doesn't fall into these same traps. Next slide, please. And so we're just going to click through. These are like more detailed barriers. So next slide. We developed a set of 8 recommendations that we are going to be giving to the California Air Resources Board and the California Energy Commission about how to make electric vehicle policy more equitable. What we would love are folks' thoughts, feedbacks, or initial feedback or initial reactions to these recommendations. And I'll just read them and kind of explain them a little bit more. The first one is provide consistent and sustainable funding to the incentives that target specific communities, and to multilingual research and education that sustains relationships with communities. So I think that one is pretty given. We did get the recommendation to add, what was the word, Nicole? Efficient enough. No, for the first one.
Oh, adequate. It was like adequate funding.
So it's not enough to just provide consistent and sustainable funding, but we also need to say that it needs to be adequate funding to ensure that we have sustained engagement. The second recommendation we're going to be uplifting is to create requirements that prioritize, reserve, and target funding for specific communities and apply for requirements to the funding incentives. So one of the things that happened was the state opens up a funding pot and they have requirements around documentation that folks don't have. And so it takes them, they have to go to DMV and get their driver's license. They have to go to the Secretary of State and get their their voter registration. And there were all of these requirements that took a lot of time. And by the time folks gathered all that paperwork, they had missed out on some of the incentives. The programs had no more funding. And so this requirement is making sure that we know the folks that when we talk about like programs to advance disadvantaged communities, we know the communities we're talking about. So let's make sure that those folks are actually being able to access the funds. And similarly to that last point, allow more flexibility in program contract guidelines so that case managers can best support communities that face many of the barriers. So one of the other things that happened is some of the organizations tried to help folks go to the Secretary of State and get their voter ID cards. And they were told, oh, you can't do that under this grant program that doesn't qualify. So we're asking for more flexibility so that CBOs and groups that are partnering to help deploy EVs actually have the room and freedom to be able to do that. Fourth one is invest in more multimodal options. So this is basically just electric vehicles alone won't save us. We need to be investing in bikes. We need to be talking about buses, and we need to make sure that we're also putting bike lanes and sidewalks and whatever we need to safely navigate. Whatever we need to safely navigate in our communities, we need to make sure we're funding those as well. Next slide. Perfect. 5 is lower the barriers to e-bike share. What's really exciting, again, I want to remind everyone, this is statewide recommendations. You're going to hear about what's happening in Sacramento. And I think what we're doing here is actually a model for the whole state that we could use. But ensuring that like, we're not just requiring credit cards for folks to get e-bikes, but there's alternative ways for folks to be able to borrow e-bikes. 6, incentivize the manufacturing of more affordable zero emission vehicles. This one is a little convoluted. We're still working on the wording. I'm just going to tell it to you in layman's terms. The way that I read it is California, we love to bully, right? We love to use our economy, our scale, our size, our force. Naeem, can you turn the light back on? Thank you. To push manufacturers. So this just means using whatever we can, incentivizing car companies to invest in more affordable vehicles, build more affordable vehicles, manufacture more affordable vehicles and e-bikes. 7, improve community engagement guidelines and evaluation metrics. Some of this takes time. We have to build trust in some of these communities. And so the evaluation metrics alone can't be how many vehicles are in a community, but they can encompass things like how many vehicle miles are reduced, how are people driving less, if we're investing in bikes, how many bike trips are happening. So just improving the metrics and community engagement guidelines. And 8 is improve the coordination among agencies to streamline funding, incentives, and agency planning. Right now, there are multiple programs across multiple agencies you can apply to. Many of them have different application processes. We would love to see one application or a streamlined application and process to get to e-bikes. Okay, we breezed through that. So, but we'll leave it on the last 2 slides. We'd love folks, and especially if you're watching, feel free to, if you're in the audience, feel free to put your comments in the chat. We'll take those as well. And we'll gladly accept those. But yeah, anybody's thoughts? Erin, I see you said you love number 4, especially. Do you want to unmute, say more?
No, I think just like offering more options than just the focus on cars is really great. And I think just, I think that just opens the gates for like lots of different options for people that are more affordable. I was wondering if incentives for used electric cars have ever been an option or something that would be considered.
Not something that I found. And my first reaction is just because the market is not necessarily there yet. We don't have a bunch of used EVs on the market yet.
Mhm.
I think that could probably have something to do with it, but I think that may be something Nicole is going to jot that down, and that's something we can look into. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen.
Thanks. Yeah, I just have a spattering of thoughts, and I think this is a really good approach, and I love all of the recommendations. Just a few things that I thought I might add on. So I think we should the ARB or another agency, CPUC. I'm not sure who governs this. Department of Consumer Affairs, something like that, needs to set standards on how much these companies can charge per kilowatt hour for DC fast charging. I've seen a Tesla superchargers charge as much as 40 or even 50 cents per kilowatt hour. That is absurd and extortionate and completely ridiculous. We should incentivize low-income people to use DCFC technology by developing some kind of program to give low-income people, say, a credit for, I don't know, 100, 200 kilowatts worth of charging per month. And I don't really like means tested programs, but if that's the case, so be it. We should also require all multifamily apartment complexes to install DCFC, or at the very least level 2 chargers, and it should be based on the number of occupants, some kind of metric there. And then I was also thinking, in terms of subsidizing or incentivizing the installation of level 2 chargers in single family homes. SMUD really needs to bring down the cost of the level 2 chargers, even with the rebates. They're like $500, $600, $700, $800 or more. I found one on Amazon that was way cheaper than that. That just plugged right into the dryer outlet, and that accomplishes, all of my needs without needing to run another 240 volt, line. And I rent, so that's not even a possibility for me. So yeah, something to help out renters as well. Work with the landlord to install the EV charging infrastructure, run a new line if that's what needs to happen. And then yes on e-bikes, yes on ZEV buses, and yes on the infrastructure to facilitate this. And I will say things like the Stockton Boulevard corridor improvements are going way too slowly. We need to pick up the pace of that and make those things a priority. It needs to happen soon, like right away, to get the climate benefits, maximize the climate benefits of that transportation corridor. And then on e-bikes, we have to do shared e-bikes better. They get left everywhere, at least in the early part of the program, on sidewalks or even thrown in the river. And then when companies like Uber don't turn a profit off of them, they just one day pull them out, and then all of a sudden they're gone. So nobody is able to reliably, know if they're even going to be there the next day or the next week. And then they turn themselves off when they go outside of a prescribed city zone, like the city limits. And that's a detriment to folks like me who live in the county. And then lastly, I think the gig car share is a really good way of helping, low income people, have, ZEV transit. I think we really deserve to have, more of that infrastructure available as well. anyway, just yeah, like I said, a smattering of comments there, but I really like the direction this is heading.
Some of those comments you may have to repeat after the second presentation, because they're a little bit more Sacramento specific, and I think the folks on the line are really excited to hear some of that feedback a little bit more detailed later. But I think the first one you made around charging and is something we hadn't heard before, and extremely interesting. So thank you for that comment. Nicole is writing all of these down. Our next steps are, we're actually going to be vetting these with the statewide policy working group that we're working with. And then we're going to be having meetings with commissioners and board members of the California Air Resources Board. And if folks in this body are interested in joining those or have other thoughts around the recommendations, or even want to see the whole report, feel free to email. Nicole, did you put your slide up?
I didn't. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Cool.
We'll drop Nicole's information in the chat. Feel free to email Moise or me. Nicole, and Moise all work at Climate Plan. So we'll make sure that Nicole gets the information needed. Oh, Nick, I didn't even see you hop on. Hey, we'd love to have your comments. And then we're going to have to move to the other presentation after Nick.
Yeah, thank you. Can I go to the next slide? I think it's something I wanted to uplift that I've heard from the community and in my daily work in the advocacy space, hearing that some of the companies certainly want to move away from or don't ever want to entertain any cash payments or even debit card, kind of physical card payments, things like this. And I think although I think there's kind of cost savings there for the companies, I think as we roll this out, it's going to be critical that the agencies and the community really hold steadfast to make sure that we keep as many traditional payment options as possible available to the community. It's going to be huge, right? If you can't pay for gas with cash or with the credit card that you have, that's already a problem, right? And so with electric vehicles, charging station, or any type of electric stations, we're going to need to make sure we keep those options available, at least for this generation. And so that's something that I know the companies are lobbying hard to get rid of. And so it seems kind of innocuous, but it's a huge barrier if it goes away.
Yeah, thank you and welcome. All right, I'm going to pass it to Isaac and Sparky for the next set of presentations. And again, if you are an attendee, feel free to put all comments in the chat. We will also make sure we capture those.
All right, I guess I should take it over now. Good evening, everybody. My name is Sparky Harris. I'm a principal planner with the City of Sacramento's Public Works Department. And I'm just here to give kind of a broad overview of the EV Blueprint Phase 2 implementation project that we're working on. But the real meat of the presentation is going to be from Isaac Gonzalez. So I will share my screen to take you through a very brief PowerPoint presentation. So hopefully everybody can see that. I can't see your faces, so I'm going to assume it's working.
Yep, we can see it.
All right, thank you, Nyla. So really, in a nutshell, what we did is back in early 2021, the City of Sacramento was granted about $1.8 million from the California Energy Commission to implement a grant that we had applied for the year before to basically say, look, if you give us this money, here's a list of things that we'll do. They liked the list, they funded the projects, and now I'm here to implement the projects. So the real kind of nuts and bolts of the project, because there's 7 different tasks, but the physical tangible pieces are really 3, and that's installing level 2 EVSC chargers. It's expanding a program called Our Community Car Share that's run by the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District, and to launch an e-bike lending program in our disadvantaged and low-income communities. So the first one is the chargers. Basically, we've gotten funding, including matching funds from the Air District, to install, I believe it's 33 chargers at 7 libraries, 7 community centers, and Granite Regional Park for a total of 67 handles. It's pretty straightforward. It's as far as car share goes, most of you know we already have gig car share in the city of Sacramento. I've been managing that project since 2018 when it launched. When the opportunity came to expand our community car share, what we landed on was actually creating an expansion, kind of a hub around the Martin Luther King Jr. Library down in the South area. So this blue cordon that you see right now is actually live today. If you have a gig membership, you can now begin or end a session within this area. And we're in the process of finalizing an agreement with the Air District to actually push out driving credits to income qualified folks that live within this blue area. The last program that I'm going to talk about is our e-bike lending program. We committed to the Energy Commission to start a new program in collaboration with the Sacramento Public Library. So we went out, we procured 30 e-bikes. Just a little caveat there. The details were that we were supposed to buy 20 e-bikes and 10 electric cargo bikes. When I inherited the project about 6 months ago, I realized that we did not have enough funding to buy the cargo bikes because cargo bikes are expensive. So I found an alternative, which is these tricycles that have cargo capacity. The Energy Commission agreed that that was comparable. So we now have in hand, ready to go right now, 10 of these e-trikes. And we were so impressed with them that we're thinking about going back to the Energy Commission because the bikes are not available. They've got Bosch components on them. And based on chip shortage, the bicycles aren't ready. The trikes were ready. We got them right off the shelf and they're ready to go. They're anticipating the bikes being ready maybe the first quarter of next year, but even then, nobody is sure. So what we're really thinking about doing is asking the Energy Commission if we can just go 100% with the trikes. I floated that idea because I feel like the trikes are probably better for all ages and abilities. A lot of people haven't ridden a bike in a long time. These are a lot less intimidating and they're actually really fun to ride. So we're in the final stages of putting together all the waiver information to get these bikes into Colonial Heights Library. That'll be our first location where we launch. And anybody over the age of 18 with a valid library card will be able to check out one of these bikes for a week or two, see how it works in terms of their mobility options, and hopefully, can convince them that they can go out and purchase one of their own if it really suits their needs. And I've got even more, but I probably shouldn't say too much about the second phase of what I want to do here yet because it's not funded. So the other couple of tasks that aren't, real tangible nuts and bolts kind of projects are AECOM has been brought on to do the monitoring and equity strategy for the EV blueprint. So as we roll out these projects, we're going to have an equity baseline. We're establishing equity metrics that we're going to track over time and eventually put that all together into a dashboard, which we'll use internally to make tweaks to the program over time just to try to maximize infiltration of all of these projects into our low income and disadvantaged communities. And then the other task is an engagement relationship building task, which Isaac is part of the team that we put together that's led by Valley Vision, really to make sure that folks in the community know what we're doing, know how to get engaged, know how to use the programs and projects that we're putting out there on the street, And one of the more interesting components of this is that we are hiring an artist to put together a comic book to help spread the word about the programs that we have out there and the benefits of them. So that's it for me. We've got a website up on the city's, we've got a web page on the city's website. If you want to keep track of what we're doing, feel free to go here. Got my contact information on it as well. And with that, I will stop sharing and hand it over to Isaac.
Thank you, Sparky. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me this evening. As Sparky alluded to, my name is Isaac Gonzalez. I'm working with a team led by Valley Vision on that community engagement side of the things for the EV equity project. I got this screen up here, and I hope if you have the ability to take your phones out and scan this QR code or go to menti.com and enter the code at your screen while I'm speaking. So what we're going to be doing is in the new year is really going out to communities and ensuring that we have a broad amount of reach and awareness of the programs and opportunities that are available, and that we do that through an equity lens. But right now, during the remainder of this year, what we're attempting to do is inform our processes by speaking to people and groups such as yourselves to help inform us and tell us the things that we don't know, tell us the things that we should know, so that our outreach can be that much more engaging. So I have a series of questions here that I would just love to have some free-form thought responses. There are no right answers and wrong answers, but I'm hoping that through this meeting tonight and then a series of meetings throughout next month, that we'll be able to coalesce some kind of through-line narrative of what it is that we should be definitely making sure of. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the first question now. And that just says, thinking about this project and what Sparky just went over, what do you think success for this EV Blueprint project will look like? So just anything at all you can think about. It's anonymous. I won't know who's responding to the answers, so you can feel free to say whatever you like as bluntly and as honestly as you would like. And we'd love to see a couple prompts, and we'll just leave it up for just about a minute. And if you're watching this recording later after the fact, I will just say that at the end here, we're going to show a link to a survey that you can take. If you're trying to take this Mentimeter survey after the fact, unfortunately, the code will be expired, so you won't be able to participate in that way. Everyone considers EVs or e-bike as an option for the trip. Yep, that's a great option. And then we know that that isn't clear all over in every neighborhood right now. New car buyers, bike riders feel like EV is the best option. Even my mom would feel comfortable. I love this. This is wonderful. It's nice to know that we have people of all ages. Can you go to any neighborhood and have chargers nearby to have access to scooters, e-bikes, and EV car share, even if you don't want to own or don't want to own one? Yes, awesome. All my neighbors drive ICE internal combustion vehicles, most part. From a climate standpoint, we have to have a complete paradigm shift. Essentially get everyone to start using alternative modes of transportation. Let's stop calling them alternatives, right? Make them the chosen one. And residents end up buying their own e-bikes. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. These are great responses. Appreciate it. We'll go ahead and go into the next one. We only have 3 more. How should Sacramento expand EV options in an equitable fashion? So first thing that pops to your mind, I mean, of course, there's many ways that we can do this, but the first one you think about maybe with communities that you work with that you know are chronically underserved, some of your thoughts about how we could expand EV options in an equitable fashion. This is always the million-dollar question for us. Lean into the engagement piece and make them affordable and attractive alternative. And when you say attractive, do you mean attractive economically? Or, I mean, actually, we actually thought about physically, like, I mean, do they need to look cool? Do they need to look attractive? Because sometimes, you know, the Prius and the e-bikes can look a little funky because they're built for function and not just form. Level 2 charges in multifamily housing development. Absolutely wonderful thought there. We definitely see a bit of a desert in the multifamily housing for the EV charging options, especially if we're going to move that way in 2035. Built environment must accommodate e-biking. I love it. I'm a big proponent of the built environment. Thank you. Municipal ownership of multi-module options. Awesome. And increase the lending options so people don't have to buy. Expanding the idea of what people mean when they say EV. Love it. Love it. Well, thank you. Those are all great responses. I'm going to move on to the next prop in the interest of time here. So as Sparky alluded to a moment ago, we're talking about a dashboard. We want to make sure that we have the metrics that we need to collect in order to make sure we're successful. So we can think of some off the top of our head: number of miles driven, number of riders adopting. But what are some other metrics when we think about equity that we should be using to track our progress in Sacramento that you can think of? And again, really think about maybe the communities that you serve that you think are chronically underserved, not just those that are already adopters, but maybe those that currently have economic barriers or other barriers in the built environment to using EV platforms. Reduction in gas cars altogether. Yes, that's a great metric. Number of low-income persons using alternative modes of transit instead of internal combustion engines. Wonderful. X amount of miles driven with gig cars. Ooh, I made that a goal. Awesome. Increasing the charging stations available, particularly in low-income communities. Luckily, we have a roadmap to that. So that's definitely a metric that we'll be able to track and I'm sure achieve. And a number of EPs per low income house versus in combustion and bus ridership. Thank you. Wonderful. Wonderful. Oh, reduction in pollution and traffic in high use corridors. I love that. Thank you very much. Okay. If you know any, or even if you don't know any, but maybe assume, what are some of the gaps the city faces in achieving equity in transportation electrification? So what are some of the gaps? Where are we missing? Why aren't we doing it? Why weren't we already doing it before the creation of this program? What's some of the missing parts, if you can think of any? And particularly the city. Oh, yes, high cost. Luckily, every now and then we get a settlement payment to help with that from Volvo and whatnot. Oh, affordability of electric vehicles. Yep, cost, trust, outreach, and marketing for EV is lagging. That's interesting in trust. City doesn't run regional transit, charger availability, dependence on fuel tax revenues, lack of charging stations in disadvantaged communities and low-income communities. Wonderful. Culture gap. Yeah, and I think that's a big one. That's why I go back again to the attractiveness. How is it perceived? That is a gap. Thank you. All right, and this is the last, I believe, question on the Mentimeter this evening. Thinking about the communities you serve again, what would be some creative solutions to entice new users to try these new EV programs? Something you think of. I know we talked about incentive programs earlier this evening and the importance to make that nimble and quick, but are there any other creative solutions you think of? Where should we be going? Who should we be talking to? Where should the incentives live? How can one either earn the incentive or get the incentive? Ride alongs, test drives, all like that. Incentives to purchase level 2 chargers. Okay. Require level 2 chargers in multifamily at a prescribed rate. Oh yeah, kind of like parking minimums, right? Why don't you make chargers a minimum? That's great. Any others? Make it easier to apply, faster to get the incentives. Yep, I think we're hearing that loud and clear tonight. Any others? Renters can't install. That's a good point. That is a good point. Maybe it's an incentive for landlords. Thank you. Get out in the community where people are. That's exactly what I want to be doing. And that's why we need your help. So that's why I would entice you to take this survey that we have right here. This survey really gets down again. It does ask some of those questions that we just asked in a little more long form. Particularly asks, what communities do you currently interface with, and what are some of the trusted people that they listen to, or where are the trusted forums they go to, the farmers market, the churches, whatever it is that they go to. We really want to know these things so that when we conduct our outreach, we get out to the people, just as you said. So if you have the time, please feel free to take the survey. This really is for people like yourselves who are really informed on this issue and are working with your population. So appreciate your time. And I hope you all found that to be interactive. Thank you.
Don't you guys hate when we rush through a meeting and then we have 20 minutes left at the end? I mean, we sped through that and it's just like, here we are. I'd love to open it up for more discussion. If folks have any thoughts about any of the 3 presentations that we want to give, that you want to share additionally. And if not, we can end a little early.
There were a few comments in the chat that we didn't get to. Megan had one.
Moise, I thought you were going to read it out for us.
I was just allowing Megan to.
Oh, perfect.
One of the things that struck me when I was in a CUPC meeting, Gal stood up and said that she had a grant for an EV, but she kept getting outbid by people who are paying cash, and the dealers weren't really interested in dealing with her grant and, you know, setting up financing and stuff like that. So I think it might be one idea might be to create a grant financing partnership, so that when a person gets a grant for an EV, that they can actually walk into a dealership with the whole package done, ready to buy the car, as just like they're just a cash paying customer. Because that apparently was what her problem was. She kept, the dealer said, well, why should I be worrying about your grant when I have to can get cash from this guy over here? You know, and so I think that might be one thing to do for low-income people in particular.
You know, Megan, we actually heard that earlier this week from one of the groups that we talked to, is like dealership education is, okay. Dealership education is an issue across the state. Thank you. All right, we have a few more comments. Steve?
Thanks, Naila. Yeah, this was really great, Isaac and Sparky. Thank you so much for your presentations. And I agree, you know, we really have to lean into the engagement piece, because I think, you know, most folks are aware, you know, that climate change is happening, but may not be aware of kind of like the extent to which, you know, we need to you know, make these total system changes, like and really an entire paradigm shift, I think what was mentioned, or you know, just the rapidity that we need to embrace kind of these this new way of going about our business, and just kind of pondering, and I know you probably do this for a living, is just, you know, what will it take for, you know, to drive mass adoption, like to get all these folks out of their cars. And there are just so many barriers, but I think a lot of those barriers can be solved with investment. And if we treated this like the emergency that it really very truly is, and mobilize, and I know it's not just a Sacramento thing, this is way beyond that. This is, you know, state and federal, you know, because city budgets are, of course, quite limited, and you're dealing with the resources that you have, and you're doing a really creative and clever job of it. And you know, suffice to say, you know, if we mobilize at the scale that we mobilized for, say, World War II, you know, we could get thousands upon thousands of e-bikes, you know, hundreds and hundreds of ZEV buses, you know, make these corridor improvements happen, you know, rapidly. And I think at the end of the day, you know, it's a matter of priorities. And you know, I guess as our current president says, you know, like show me your budget and I'll tell you, you know, what your priorities are. And so I think that really is quite true. You know, so if we really want to make this a priority, we have to put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, to use a hackneyed turn of phrase. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, you know, just a lot more investment, and in combination with that engagement, just to give you an example, the county, recently switched to every week organics collection, the green waste cart, and a lot of people still, put them out every other week and don't even know that, you can put the food waste in there and that there's so many climate benefits associated with that. So yeah, really just doing a good job in terms of messaging and all of that. I think in combination with investment will really inspire action. And I don't have all the answers, but I think that's maybe a good place to start.
Thank you. Even though you don't have the answers, you get us pretty close, and you have great questions, which also gets us closer to the answer. So we appreciate all your feedback. Nick?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I want to get a sense, does the city have like a stated goal for, chargers per 100,000 or chargers per mile? I mean, is there a sense of this, like how many chargers we have toward how many chargers we need to sort of get us to sort of a no wrong street, no wrong corner kind of approach that we have today in place for gas stations? I mean, is there a metric? Is there a standard for that? I'd like to know more about that.
I can take that one. No, the city doesn't have a metric that I am aware of. You will be seeing, though, I mentioned that AECOM is doing this equity analysis, and part of it is doing a case study analysis with 5 other cities throughout the country, and it includes some metrics in there that come from the federal level, estimating how many chargers per million population the country needs to fully embrace EVs. So some of those numbers will be in that equity study. But the other thing that I want everyone to keep in mind, and I believe this is safe for me to say, the city's played a large part in kind of kickstarting the whole EV charging implementation. I mean, we've got some curbside charging in Southside Park, Midtown, things like that. It's not really the city's long-term goal to build and provide charging. I mean, the same way that we don't provide gas stations, but this is such an important thing that we wanted to at least get a few of them out there to show people how important they are, how useful they are. But it's really something that needs to be picked up by the private sector in terms of future installations of these and proliferation of it.
Right. And I think I'll just end my comments by thinking that in this space, over time, as we mature in this discussion and our rollout, that it'll be incumbent upon us as a community to encourage our cities and our counties to zone for these types of uses, and to encourage these types of uses across all sorts of communities and all sorts of multimodal developments. Because I think when we replace the gas station with the charging station, keep the AMP, and that's okay. Then I think we really see that sort of daily cultural change. That's something that I think about in my work working for cities across the state. I appreciate it, Sparky. I appreciate it, Isaac.
Thank you.
Erin, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering, and I'm not sure of the answer, like the intricacies, but there's, other countries with great electric vehicle adoption flip it, where people aren't having to apply for rebates and going through the process. They're having to get taxed for having their gas car, right? And it makes it so that people don't have to go through that whole application process. It's like they have to almost do that if they want a gas card. I know California is getting rid of or banning the sale of gas cars by 2035, but there's still a decent amount of time before that. Like, are there any opportunities? I'm not quite sure how that works, but thinking about like, why do we have a rebate? Why do we have to apply for one and have it just be the opposite?
It's just hard.
I
People don't
know.
want to change their car. People don't want to leave their cars. I think we're already having trouble with just minimum EV adoption now. Manufacturing issues, supply issues, but just also like kind of what Isaac was getting at. Is it the shiny object that people want? Not necessarily. And so I think all of those make the shift that you're talking about a lot more difficult to just go for a complete ban. We're already getting a lot of pushback around the 2030. The other
Yeah.
thing, which this is not the venue for this, but the other, what is it, soapbox that I stand on right now is just how crazy pricing is going to become as we transition to electric vehicles that we still have to figure out. If we're not don't have a gas tax to pay for our roads, we need to figure out how we're going to continue to pay for our roads. So there's a lot of things that we need to figure out. Like we're building the plane as we fly it. We know that we need people to move to electric vehicles. We're like trying to figure out the how as well. So if someone else has a better answer for Aaron, please feel free to jump in. Sparky, I have a question for you, potentially for you. And it's this, I think for me, I do this work and never thought about this. The fact that like, yes, we do need cities aren't supposed to handle the charging infrastructure. Is there any type of incentive programs that you know about for like mom and pop chargers? The same way we have like mom and pop gas stations. Do we see a future where like, you know, we can have like community business owners that just have chargers on land?
Yes. I don't know if I'd call them incentives, but we keep running into these for-profit companies that are basically just trying to find places to do these things. There's a pretty large location that we're working on in the River District right now, where a company is basically saying, hey, if you give us the right of way, we'll put in the chargers because they're going to make money on the energy that they charge plus a little premium, all of these things. So I could see in the future more opportunities for those companies to just start talking to all these little mom and pop gas stations and saying, hey, if you're going to turn over, we'll give you the infrastructure. We'll pay for the gas, or for the electricity that's coming in. We'll charge the customer and we'll give you a little share of the profit.
Wow.
There's
Right.
a lot of them. I know at least 3 of them off the top of my head right now.
Wow. Well, so if anybody's looking for a new business to get into, reach out to Sparky. I want to call out some of the comments in the chat. I'm not going to read them word for word, but Lori talked about the older people and getting them on board, and e-bikes isn't necessarily an option. They can be intimidating. So in creating, make it fun, gamify, group rides, things like that. One of the things that we talk about in other regions we work in is if you run an organization, you're a city body, whatever you can, making meetings accessible via e-bike, say like, hey, this is where you park a gig card next to my meeting place. Like make it as accessible, make that the first option, institutionalize it into your meetings. Like, hey, if you're coming to our meetings, you're going to take bus 68, or there's an e-bike share program right next to the community center, or you can park your gig car here. And just like bottom line at all of your agendas, all of your emails, if you're having in-person meetings. Other comment, Megan just gave one. I would like to, Megan, since you're on, do you want to just unmute and say your comment?
Yeah, I've been saying this to the city, to the county for a while, and I keep saying it to the city and to the CUPC and anybody else who might listen, that we should consider not issuing any further permits for gas stations, but only issue permits for fueling stations that have alternative fueling at the station. They can have traditional fossil fuels if they like, but they also need to have at least one other alternative fuel like hydrogen or EV charging. And this is the way we get it to be more ubiquitous in our community and where everybody can find one. It's not a science project to find a charging station when you go to a new city. If it was everybody had them everywhere, then it would be a lot easier. That's one of the things that I think a lot of ICE vehicle drivers are afraid of, is how am I going to find a charging station when I'm running out of charge, and then you say, well, there's apps, and then they go, oh, I've got to use an app, and they're worried about finding charging when they need it. So I think we should demand they start making that transition to having multi options at a fueling station. And the old gas stations, this is a transition, so it's just for the new permits. If you're going to build a new one, they got to have the new stuff. Is sort of my idea.
Thank you, Megan. So we are 4 minutes out. Please continue to put your comments in the chat. I will stay on for a second if you have like comments that you want to make sure, make it in the chat for folks. I have no idea what's so funny. None. What's not funny is there's pizza stains all over my couch, but the sacrifices I make for you guys. All right. 2 announcements, and I'm gonna try and tread the line on this and not make full advertisements or political statements, but there are a lot of things on the ballot. It's election season, so we want to make sure that you guys are just aware. One of the incentives is Prop 30 right now is Moise, I'm gonna pass it to you. Sorry.
Sure, no problem. If folks are not familiar with Proposition 30, it is a tax on personal income over $2 million in the state of California that would be applied, and it would generate funds to be allocated 80% to the EV transition, and then 20% to wildfire specific efforts. And so that specifically, I believe, is training and hiring wildfires. I know we have a shortage in California, often relying on like prison labor, and that's a huge controversy. And within the breakdown of like the 80% to EVs, that specifically I think is 45% to rebates, and then 35% I may have that flipped to funding for charging infrastructure, half of which is dedicated to low-income communities. Very unprepared explanation of Proposition 30, but I think that is the general premise.
Yeah, as we were going through this presentation, we were thinking, while we don't want to necessarily use the space to endorse, wink, wink, we do want to let everyone know that there's other opportunities to make sure that some of this stuff gets funded. So your conscience. With that, we greatly appreciate everyone's time and attention to this issue. We will in coming months follow up with how both of these projects are moving forward and make sure folks are updated. Highly recommend though using the lending library for the cargo bikes, but also the lending libraries at the library in Sacramento are amazing. You can get DVD players and drones and sewing machines and everything. And so like, let's make sure we're utilizing those resources because they are amazing. And we need to build them out. Thank you, everyone. Isaac, you raised your hand. It's accident. Okay. Do I end us with a quote? I don't remember. Does this group end with a quote? No.
If you have one.
Oh, wait.
Since you guys are transitioning, how about nothing ever ends?
There we go. Nothing ever ends. I like that a lot. All right, everyone. Have a really good month. See you guys in this space in a month. Naeem.